screamed a lot when I saw him. Then I had to call her.
Ice cream? A lot of soy in? I had to call her?
I gotta go to the beach.
I go to bitch.
Hey, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been listening to natives and it sounded nothing like what you were expecting? Well, in today's lesson, we will look at some of the main sounds in American English, as well as connected speech patterns. So if you want to improve your pronunciation and even be able to understand fast-speaking natives, then this lesson is for you. And here at Real Life English, every single week we make lessons like this that help you to stop feeling like a lost and insecure English learner and become a confident, natural English speaker. So join our community of over 300,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button and the bell down below now. So if you've been learning English for a while, you probably already know that often instead of saying going to, we reduce it to gonna. For example, I'm gonna go change, or I'm gonna go get another espresso. However, did you know that we can reduce gonna even more?
Well, I'm gonna get another espresso. More latte?
And if you want to take it even a step further, you can reduce I'm going to I'ma. Now, this used to be considered more street English, but now all the time it's becoming more common in everyday English.
Joke's on you, they was always friends. Now I'ma get my immunity.
If you're like most learners, then you're probably terrified of accidentally saying, I'm gonna go to the bitch, right? This is because it's very difficult for most learners to distinguish between the long E, and the short I sound in English. But really, it's quite simple. It just requires a lot of practice to make sure that you're saying the right sound and so that you can identify it when you hear it. So we have the long E where you have to kind of smile. So E, and the short I is much more neutral. Your mouth barely moves. I. Let's look at some examples to help you to practice this. Leave, live. Feel, fill. Sheep, ship. Cheap, chip. Peak, pick. Another interesting reduction that happens in pretty much every accent of English is the v or of preposition being reduced to an schwa sound in English. So this happens when we have a contraction, for example, could've, would've, should've, which we can all reduce just to that schwa sound, coulda, woulda, shoulda. However, this also happens with the word of, which we get rid of that v sound and it just becomes a schwa as well. So we have phrases like a lot of, which becomes a lotta, out of, which becomes outa, or one of, which becomes wanna. It's pretty amazing how this happens in the negative form as well. So if we want to say could not have, that can become a contraction, couldn't have, but then it can also be reduced even more to couldn't have. Should not have, shouldn't have, shouldn't have. Would not have, wouldn't have, wouldn't have. All right, so let's do a checkpoint to test how you're doing so far. We're going to have a couple more of these, so always be prepared for a quiz. So the first question, listen to the clip and try to identify which version of the going to reduction you hear.
All right, I'm gonna go change. I've got a date. All right, I'm gonna go change. I've got a date. I'm gonna go change. I've got a date.
Now listen to me and fill in the blanks. There was a man on the ship changing the chip in his cheap phone. There was a man on the ship changing the chip in his cheap phone. Now you read this sentence out loud first and then listen to me say it to compare to see how you did with the pronunciation. I should have gone first because there were a lot of people there. I hear learners pronounce incorrectly the past tense of regular verbs all the time. It's this ed ending that tends to trick people up because we can have 3 different possibilities for how to pronounce this. So we can have a t sound at the end in words like worked, fixed, watched. We can have just a d sound at the end d, in words like played, stayed, tried. And if we have a T or a D before the past tense, then we get a full id sound. So that's in words like wanted, decided, rented. Maybe you've noticed before that Americans often change the t sound in words where the T comes between 2 vowels. We call this an American T, and it sounds very similar to the R sound in some Latin languages like Spanish and Portuguese. It's just a quick tap of your tongue behind your teeth. Ra, ra, ra. So let's look at some examples. Water, better. However, this doesn't just happen in individual words. It can happen in connected speech as well, where we have a word ending in a T and being followed by a vowel, as long as it's also preceded by a vowel. So for example, get out of becomes get outta. At 8 o'clock becomes at 8 o'clock. By the way, why don't you practice some of these pronunciation skills that you're gaining in today's lesson with learners from all over the world? Now you might be asking me, how can I do that? I don't know anyone from other places. We've made it super simple for you with the Real Life app. Now this is the only place where at the touch of a button, anytime, anywhere, you can connect with learners from around the world and have fascinating conversations about whatever interests you, be that your passions, your jobs, your dreams. Just look at what one of our users, Clyde, says about his experience. He says, "This is a very practical app gathering almost all the skills that you need to improve your English and reach the next level. Listening, reading, and speaking, here it is. In addition, you can listen not only to native speakers, but learners as well. Thanks for this app and keep going." Just like Clyde, you can improve your speaking skills and again, practice everything that you're learning today by downloading the Real Life app for free by clicking up here or down the description below. Or you can simply search for Real Life English in the Apple app or Google Play Store. The schwa is perhaps one of the most important sounds to master in English. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist in a lot of other languages. It's the simple, unstressed sound. In fact, a lot of times I like to tell my students that, we tend to think culturally that English speakers are pretty lazy. And this is reflected even in the language because this sound is super lazy. You don't really do anything with your mouth. You just barely open it and go, And this is really important because it's the most common sound in virtually every accent of English. It's also a sound that we'll use when we're speaking. So don't fall into the bad habit of using the same sound you'd use in your native language. Try using the schwa sound instead. So that would be something like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And almost all unstressed sounds in words and sentences have this schwa sound in them. So let's take a look at how you can find the schwa sound in a word. First, you need to look at or listen to the word and isolate the vowel sounds. So let's use the word construction, for example. Next, you'll find the primary stressed syllable in that word. And then finally, as we heard before, usually unstressed syllables use that schwa sound. So probably besides that stressed syllable, all the other ones will be schwas. Construction, construction. By the way, if you want to learn all about how to find and use the schwa, we made this lesson recently talking all about it, as well as a podcast really diving deep into how to master the schwa sound and sound more natural when you speak English. You can find those by looking in the description down below. All right, are you ready for checkpoint number 2? Let's take a look at that simple past tense pronunciation that we covered before. Be sure to pause the video if you need. All you have to do is look at the different words and sort them to how they are pronounced. You ready? Let's go. Worked, tried, decided, fixed, rented, played, watched, wanted, stayed. Now, another type of word that we almost always reduce is pronouns. And some of these will even drop letters. So that's the case with pronouns like he, him, her, and them. We drop the H or we drop the TH in the case of them. So let's listen to how this sounds in real sentences. Where did he go becomes where'd he go? He doesn't talk to her becomes he doesn't talk to her. What is his thing becomes what is his thing? Keep them flying becomes keep them flying. This is a super tricky sound in American English. So much so that if you have confusion around it, you should definitely check out the full lesson that we made all about it. But let's look at it briefly in today's lesson. So when we have this T plus vowel plus N, first of all, we're going to pretty much fully drop the vowel. It almost disappears altogether. Next, when we make that T, typically when we make a T, we do a plosive sound, right? It's t, t, t. What you're going to do is stop your tongue behind your teeth before that plosive sound is able to be made. So let's look at an example. Got, got, And the final thing is that by doing that, by holding our tongue up, we're going to force the air out of our nose to make that N sound. So it becomes got, got, If that N sounds hard for you, just practice it. And because you're naturally blocking here, it will eventually come out. Just try to feel that sound in your nose. Just to give you a few more examples, I'll say them and then repeat after me, trying to say it as closely as to how I said it. Mountain. Curtain. Fountain. Manhattan. Let's look at some more sound morphing. So we have two more cases with the T and the D combining with certain vowels. And this happens in certain words with the Y, particularly with the pronoun you. Now, if you is preceded by a D or a T, those two sounds come together and they morph. So if we have a T and a Y, it actually becomes a ch sound. If we have a D and a Y, it becomes a j sound. So let's take a look at some examples to make this more clear. I'll say them and you repeat after me. So got you becomes got you. However, we can reduce this even more to a schwa sound. That often happens with the pronoun you is that we'll change it to ya. So got you can also become gotcha, gotcha. By the way, using gotcha can be a really great alternative to saying I understand or I heard what you said. Would you like to go becomes would you like to go? And in the same way here, we can say would you, but we can also reduce the you and say would ya? Would you like to go? All right, time for your final checkpoint, and then we have one more pronunciation tip before we wrap up today's lesson. So first, read the sentence aloud, and then listen to me say it to check your pronunciation. I saw a fountain when I got to the top of the mountain. All right, now listen to me and choose the correct option. After talking to her, he decided to call him. After talking to her, he decided to call him. Now, while this last sound doesn't interfere with your communication, it does help to add extra nuance and helps you to sound even better and more natural when you speak. So did you know that there are two ways that you can pronounce the S sound? It can either have a S sound or a Z sound. But how can you know when it's supposed to sound like S or when it's supposed to sound like Z? So let's take a look at an advanced trick. So many times the S in nouns and adjectives has a S sound. Let's take a look at a few examples. Close, use, house, excuse, abuse. However, the S in verbs tends to have a Z sound. So let's look at some examples of verbs with this. Close, use, house, excuse, abuse. Pretty cool, isn't it? Check out these examples with full sentences. The S's in blue have a S sound, while the S's in red have a Z sound. If you don't use what you learn, knowledge is useless. Close one of the windows and walk close to me. Excuse me, but this isn't a good excuse. You shouldn't house a pet in your house. If you let it loose, you might lose it. You know, the letter S in English is such a fascinating sound, and we just don't have the time to cover all about it in today's lesson. So would you like another lesson that's talking all about the different nuances of the S sound in English? Then be sure to leave a comment down below saying, I want another lesson all about the S sound. If there are many requests, then we'll definitely create a lesson on it. To keep learning more about pronunciation, then next I highly recommend that you check out this lesson where we give you some tips on how you can speak English faster. Let's check out a clip from that.
So that you can speak English faster, but also understand natives better, even when we speak fast. So we have 6 main tips and tricks for you today, and it's important to note that although you think that we do speak English fast, it's more about the way that we speak rather than the speed.